Welcome to the Writing Community Chat Show. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's Writing Community Chat Show, which is a weird one for you guys as it is Tuesday and this is pre-recorded, so there's two different things going on here, but there's all good reason for that. And tonight's guest is going to be a very interesting one for us. We of course love the story on this show. We like to find out how an indie author came around and what they're doing and how they got into what they're doing, and this story is very unique because you'll find out why very shortly. There's a few things to talk about. The sponsoring for the Frontline Walk I'm doing next year is going very well. I've already raised 164 out of 1,250 in a few days, and I've posted a new video on the WCCS website in the forum. So check that out and put your suggestions in there. There's a few questions asked, so please check that out. We're going to jump straight into the interview, and I'm very excited to chat to this person because it's a really interesting story, and I hope we get some great answers in there, and I'll be very interested to see how an indie author's journey compares to this person's journey and if they did anything different. So without further ado, let me introduce tonight's guest. She is an author, a speaker, a blogger and podcaster. Her debut book is called The Black Sisterhood Files, and it's a murder thriller, which is very interesting, as tonight's guest is just 14 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kristina Naydonova. Hello to you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited to be here today.
No problem at all. Thank you so much for joining me. I know you've got a very busy schedule, as we just talked about, so it's thank you for fitting us in. First of all, how are you doing, and how's things at the moment for you?
Everything's good. Yeah, school actually started just about a month ago, so there's been quite a lot of homework lately, but I'm trying to manage my time in regard to writing and speaking and everything. So yeah, it's been good. Thank you. How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. I know you seem and sound to have a much busier life than me, so I'll definitely appreciation for that, and like I said, for fitting us in. I'm all good. I've been walking. I posted a video today. I've got a big walk next year, so I'm going to be doing a lot more of that. So
Really
that's
cool. Yeah.
taking up some time as well. So the first part of the show, always the road to writing. I'll play a little video and we'll get into that and find out exactly how you got to where you are now.
Of course.
And obviously, there's going to be a big path ahead, but we want to see just exactly where that inspiration came from and where it started. So let's get into round one of the show. So fantastic. Kristina, tell us, where did writing come from in your life? Where was the inspiration for you, and how did you get started?
So writing has always actually been a very lengthy journey of mine, and I think it began first when it was around actually in second grade. And it's an interesting story because my second grade teacher was possibly one of my favorite teachers of all time. And we were doing a writing prompt that was basically taking a famous fairy tale and creating what was called a twisted tale, where we added our own elements into that tale. And I remember I chose Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and my teacher actually broadcasted my story to the entire class because of how much she liked it.
Wow.
And she read it to the entire class, and I got a lot of good feedback from my friends and my classmates and my teacher. And I remember also showing the story to my parents, and from there beginning to write poems or short stories for their birthdays or for different holidays like Christmas or Thanksgiving. And since I realized that I really had a passion for writing, and it was all kinds of different writing, which stemmed predominantly from a love for reading that I've had since a really young age. Actually, yeah, I would say that I'm really into reading. I have read a lot of books, and that started when I read my first chapter book, and I think it was kindergarten. I remember it was a chapter book about whales, and since then I've been really intrigued in taking and seeking creativity from the books that I read and kind of doing what was with that twisted fairy tale where I take other authors' ideas and I compound them on my own, and that's how I create my short stories, my poems, and that's how my fresh ideas stem from other authors' ideas. So I think my love for writing was always kind of just intrinsic, and I began to develop it and realize it when I started to actually write poems and short stories for family and friends and in school predominantly.
That is a fantastic story, and
Thank
what
you.
I love about that story is how you had a real connection with your teacher, and it's a very
Mhm.
crucial point of someone's life.
Completely
And,
agree.
I've mentioned it before. I think if someone, for example, if you had not had that positive experience, you may have not got into reading and writing as you did, and you may not have been on this journey. So it
Mhm.
really can
That's
influence
very
people.
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how important do you feel that was for your stepping on your writing career?
I think, as you said, it was actually incredibly vital because I believe that a teacher and a student relationship is very important in school. Because first, you need to be able to do just more than participate in class and to be able to communicate with their teacher.
Mm,
And if they're struggling, for instance, or if they're really interested in the subject, then the ability to communicate with the teacher and find out more about it, or for instance, like I did, to get feedback on it and constructive criticism, I think it's actually very vital because over the years, I've obviously had my fair share of teachers who I haven't exactly been mutual with, if I can put that
yeah.
respectfully. And then I've also had many teachers. Actually, I remember my third grade teachers. My math teacher was incredible, and even though math has always actually been my weakest subject, I still found it a lot simpler to be able to progress with her as opposed to other teachers in the past or in the future. So I would say that the teacher-student relationship, especially in certain subjects that you're interested in, is very, very crucial.
It really is. Maths is also not my finest subject,
Yeah.
um, but some people love it.
Mhm.
So you started writing these short stories, these poems, and all these different kind of things when you were young. Uh, at what point did you start to think I can actually do this in a more serious way? But how did that writing go from writing poems, go from writing shorter stories into writing a novel? Did you have to go on a learning curve for that, or was it quite a natural process for you?
Mhm. So I think it was actually more of the latter, more of a natural process, because this is also kind of an interesting story. So, in fifth grade, we also had to do prompts that were also actually twisted tales. So it's funny, and I chose Cinderella this time around, and the requirement for the page numbers was 10 pages, but I had this really, really great idea that I wanted to expand on, so I made it accidentally 30 pages. And my teacher was actually fine with that because she said that it wasn't like I was just uselessly writing a bunch of pages to fulfill the amount. It was more
Mm,
of just me having this great idea that I wanted to amplify, and then I didn't want to constrain myself to 10 pages. So that's when I realized that, because before I think that I was just apprehensive about writing any more than just 2 pages of a short story or less than a page of a poem.
mm.
And this made me realize that if I really have a great idea, that it's possible to go beyond even 30 pages and go to 200 pages or so, or 300 pages. And that's when I began thinking, what idea can I actually utilize in the sense that will help me achieve more than just a short story or more than just a poem?
Wow. I love that you are talking about picking up fairy tales and adapting them at the moment, because we had Soman Chinani on Friday, who was
Hmm.
just released Beast and Beauty, which is all about fairy tales, but
Hmm.
really twisted up in a kind of a dark little
Yeah.
sense. And that is something I don't know if you've read, but that would probably
Yeah.
really
No, that
captivate you.
sounds, yeah, I'll definitely check that out because I don't know if you know this, but the Lunar Chronicle series by I think Marissa Meyer. Um, I generally don't really like to read fantasy that much, but those books are one of my favorites of all time because I love when someone is able to take a fairy tale and incorporate their own elements into it because it proves to be very interesting when it's well
Mm,
done.
definitely. So then you've got the idea of what you have released now, which is the Black Sisterhood Files.
Mhm.
Um, how did that manifest from an idea into a story and down on the page?
Mhm. So actually, a lot of elements I would say came from real life because around the time that I began writing my debut novel, that was also around the time that I began reading Stephen King
Hmm.
and Edgar Allan Poe, and those are possibly my two favorite authors of all time, alongside George Orwell. So actually, when I read a lot of Poe's short stories and a lot of Stephen King's novels, such as It and Pet Cemetery, I really began thinking about how invested I was in that particular genre, like horror and thriller and mystery, and I began taking elements from my life, such as coming of age, and incorporating them into elements such as mystery and horror, as well as elements that surrounded me. So actually, um, this is also intriguing. There's a house that neighbors mine, and I remember when I was a kid, I was actually a little afraid of that house because it stands on a hill, and some of the time the windows were boarded up because the owner would go away to a different country to visit family for a long period of time. And I remember that house always inspired me also because it was best set eerie, especially during some like fall when all the trees would shroud it entirely. And become and change colors more so than they did, for instance, during the summer, during the spring. So it was actually just me taking these creative elements from my own life and combining them with books I read, as I mentioned before, which helped me develop that novice idea for the story.
Yeah, that is amazing, and it's great to have those real life experiences, like you said there,
Yeah,
and pick up on them, especially like the creepy kind of house that you see in the classic films and horrors and things like that.
yeah.
So, tell me, what age did you start reading Stephen King?
I'm sorry?
At what age did you start reading Stephen King's
So
books?
I tried to read it when I was in fourth grade, and unfortunately, I didn't really understand many of the words that King was using, as well as many of the phrases or terms or humor that he was using. So I picked it up again, and I think it was late fifth grade, and this time around, I just comprehended it more, and I really, really enjoyed that novel. It took me a while to get there since it's 1,300 pages, I think, and it's a lot going on there. Often I would just read maybe
Mm,
one chapter at a time because there were just so many elements that played into the plot that I had to put it down sometimes and just digest it. But actually, that's what I really like about Kane, that he's able to expand on his ideas so much and not to the point where it gets boring. So Stephen King can fill a page talking about a chair or what a room looks like. And normally it would get idle during that time and I'd want to put the book down. But the way Kane does it, it's very interesting. That's why I think his writing style is incredibly unique compared to other thriller writers.
fantastic. So you mentioned quite a few authors there that you really kind of you were into and you like reading. Is there anyone in particular you kind of really think their writing is almost an influence yourself, but what you would
Mhm.
kind of think you would love to get to kind of that level?
Edgar Allan Poe for sure. I
Okay.
really, really enjoy Edgar Allan Poe's writing. I remember I read The Black Cat when I was actually pretty young, and since then I've read a lot of his stories. And my favorite as of right now, my favorite poem of his is The Raven because it's a classic and it's terrifically written. My favorite short story is possibly either I'm trying to remember what it's called. I think it's The Red Mask of Death and or The Fall of the House of Usher because those stories are so intricately written. And again, it's the themes that he selects may seem basic at their core, like ghosts or insanity or death or murder, but when you really delve into the details and the characters he uses, it becomes a lot more intriguing than your typical ghost story.
Yeah. I mean, at the moment, you know you're firmly fixated on the horror, the mystery,
Yeah.
all of those sort of genres, and you've written along that way. Do
Mhm.
you think at some point you might divert from that, or is there, or you kind of really think this you've already found your niche?
Yeah, so I actually already have diverted from it because the novel that I'm writing right now is going to be a science fiction. And I'm
Okay.
really excited about that because my whole life I've also loved science fiction. I love Isaac Asimov, Prelude to Foundation, and I, Robot. I love watching science fiction movies. And I was never entirely confident in my ability to actually pursue that genre in regard to writing because it is rather difficult and it seemed rather difficult, which it is to write because it's especially with the kind of themes and the kind of characters that I'm incorporating into my present novel, it definitely is actually a lot more of an effort to create than it is with thrillers, for instance. But I'm really enjoying it so far because it's, again, as you said, a divagation from normality for me.
Yeah, that is very interesting. Okay, let's talk about your writing process then.
Mhm.
Uh, do you have any sort of quirks? Because a lot of writers do. You know, they wear certain clothing, they play certain music. Um, what is that for you? How is that like? And are you a plotter or a planner?
Mhm.
Plotter or pantster? And
Mhm.
for is that board behind you for your
Mhm.
writing?
Mhm. So to answer your first question, um, so sorry, your first question was
I know I threw
what?
like all
Yeah, do
three
I have a
questions in once there, didn't I?
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's totally right. So yeah, for the first question, I like to listen to Mozart when I'm writing because I found that Mozart really stimulates my ability to actually think of new ideas and then to put them out on paper or on computer because I type when I'm writing. I do sometimes write, but most of the time I type because my hand hurts after a while when I actually write down on paper. And the second question, I'm not a planner at all. I will plan certain elements that are important to the story, but otherwise I will just develop it as it goes and develop it as what I'm feeling in the moment because it's actually, I think, a very important part of being a writer to translate your own feelings and your own emotions and your own sentience onto the stories or the books that you are creating.
Hmm.
And
I've got
um,
to say, I think I misjudged you because I thought I normally pick up quite well. I thought all that board behind you is full of your writing information and you were a firm planner. But
mhm,
I like the fact
yeah.
you're not, and that's It's great.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely not actually. I tried to be. I remember that I tried to be when I was writing my first debut novel, and I tried to plan ahead, but that just didn't work for me. And
Mm.
since I've realized that it's okay, because I remember I used to think that, well, I see all these writers talking about how they plan out their novels and how they write certain elements of different chapters or different characters, and I don't do that. So is there something wrong with me, or is there something wrong with my writing? Then I realized that there isn't, and it's just different for every single novelist. So yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, there are plenty of them out there, the Pansters team. But, people change as well. People go from one to
Yeah.
the other. So it's interesting to see how that will develop.
Mhm.
How is your ability to tackle, say, now the sci-fi compared to writing what you knew from before?
Mhm. It's actually definitely a lot easier because I remember when I was writing my debut novel, it was fairly difficult considering it was my first time actually creating something this long. And I had an unreasonable amount of drafts that I pursued before actually deciding on a concrete beginning because I had the idea in mind. I just didn't really know how to actually start writing it. And because I was so used to condensing everything into a short story or into a poem that I didn't really have the ability at first to kind of expand. And
Mm.
I remember this was actually a problem I had with a lot of people who proofread my writing or family or friends that looked at my writing in the form of a novel. They told me that they felt it was too rushed and it was too condensed because of how used to I was writing short stories. Now that I've had more experiences, first of all, in school, writing a lot longer essays with more detail, now that I'm in high school, um, and writing actually longer poems, writing longer short stories, and actually writing a novel now, it definitely is a lot easier to take that detail and begin to expand it as opposed to just cram it all in as you would with a short story.
Definitely. It's amazing to see that the way that's growing.
Mhm.
So are you thinking, I noticed you haven't got a website. Is that something you're working on or think is important for an author? How do you feel like the social side of being an author? Are you developing that?
I do actually have a website.
Ah,
I'm
I saw
not
your
sure.
face then. I thought, no, she's got one.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do actually have a website. It's not my full name. It's just Christina.co. And I think a website is so important because before I began to actually manage and create that website, it was really difficult for me to attract more readers and to have them become more than just one-time readers and more permanent fans. Because with a website, I'm able to tell them more about myself because prior to my creation of my website, I used actually what's called a link tree, where basically I just put a
mhm,
bunch of links in one site that you could click. And it was useful at first, but definitely with a website, just also where I'm able to see statistics of who clicks on which link, on which page, how many people visit my site daily. Um, it's definitely a lot more helpful and has definitely helped grow my business as an author more than with just a link tree.
yeah, I've just been on there. I found it.
Yeah,
It's all good. Great
yeah.
research.
Uh-huh.
So looking at what you've written, your first book, that story has. I don't know where I'm going with this. Sorry. Um, where have we got to? Okay, yeah. So that's what I was getting at. So
Mhm.
you've written your story, and you've put this together. You've had your proofreads, and you've come back, and you think you've created something that's ready to go. How did you approach that in terms of self publishing, and did you have
Mhm.
any idea how to do that, or was it kind of learning at the time?
Yeah. So to be honest, I really didn't because I didn't even know what traditional publishing versus self-publishing was. I thought you kind of, to be honest, I thought you kind of just put your book out there overnight and then it was there. Because I was really young. I was 11 years old when I actually began to move into the publishing process since I got published at 12. So I had no idea how it worked. And the predominant thing that helped me was actually talking to other authors. The very
Mm.
first author I talked to was Daniel Pink, who is a nonfiction author. He's a New York Times bestselling nonfiction author of more than 5 books, I think. And I have read two of his books, When and Sell as Human, which are both incredibly written. And talking to him about this journey versus traditional versus self-publishing, and then talking to another bestselling author, Michelle Hillier, who self-published versus Daniel Pink, who traditionally published, was really interesting because with Michelle, I learned that self-publishing gave you so many more opportunities and so much more freedom.
Mm.
I figured that was what I wanted more as opposed to a publisher who dictated every podcast I went on, every article I wrote, what I put in my website, my strategies for marketing or whatnot. So I decided ultimately to go with self-publishing because it was also just a lot easier. And at the time, since I was young, it was just a lot easier for me to actually process and for me to be able to put my book out there and use and just do what I wanted with it as opposed to what somebody else wanted me to do with it.
Yeah, I appreciate that and understand that as well.
Yeah,
Publishing a book at 11 years old is a massive achievement.
thank you.
What was the reaction from sort of friends and family at the time? Were they all kind of positive and encouraging you, or was there negativity in there at all?
Mhm. There was definitely negativity in it, not from friends and family, because my friends and family were all incredibly supportive of it, but just some people in my school were a little negative about it. And for the most part, actually, that's how a lot of people in my school came to know me. Actually,
Mm,
for a while in school, I was known as the book girl. And people just knew me like that. I mean, I would talk to people and they would say that people at different schools would know who I was and would talk about me. And it was actually kind of startling at first because it wasn't always positive. And
mm.
I know that it wasn't always positive because it was just different, I guess, from everyone else. And that sounds a little strange saying, but most of the time it was positive, which I really appreciated. I had people at school that I didn't even know just coming up to me and telling me they recognized me, because they would hear people talking about me or they would see me online or something. And then I obviously had people that my friends telling me, oh, I heard this person talking about your book in a negative way,
Mm.
or I heard this person talking behind your back about this. So it was a bit difficult to manage at first. I'm glad that I published during online school, so it wasn't as difficult as it would have been actually going in person. But over now it's dissipated and now it's a lot better. So yeah. But it
At
was
least,
pretty hard at first, especially considering I was really young when it all began.
yeah, at least they were talking about your book, right? I mean,
Yeah,
could
it's
have been
true.
worse.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So let's move on to part two of the show. We can actually talk directly about your book, and you can tell the audience a bit about what the story is,
Yeah.
and we'll dive into that.
Okay.
So, Christina, what is the Black Sisterhood Files all about?
So the novel is about a group of six teenagers, one of which is new to the town, who are part of a group that is into helping the police with different crimes called the Black Sisterhood. And they stumble upon a case of a mysterious killer, whose killings seem to have a strange pattern of sorts, and it's their mission to help the police to decode who the killer is and what their motives are.
It's a fantastic story, and
Thank you.
I instantly think I see the connection of Stephen King in there.
Yeah,
Do you know
for
what I mean?
sure.
It's got that vibe about it straight
Yeah.
away, and it's already had on Amazon when I checked this page, US maybe 122 ratings on there, which is incredible.
Thank
Um, and there's a few reviews that I've pulled out of there that I
you.
want to talk about and ask
Mhm.
questions off the back of.
Yeah.
So the first one, you can already see her natural strengths, which lie in plot concept, drama, and a sense of dialogue, and a grand finale with surprising ending to try and offer satisfaction. Great review. First thing, plot concept. Strength in plot concept is something that most authors try to achieve.
Mhm.
How do you approach that? And do you have any advice for someone who might be in the same boat, who hasn't quite got there, who could use that advice?
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think the strength and how you're trying to develop the plot is really important. And that wasn't always easy for me, but going back to actually writing the short stories, I think that's what really helped me because there's a famous quote by a Russian writer that is, sorry, I didn't finish writing the short story. You didn't give me enough time. And the point of that is that with a short story, it's actually a lot more difficult to create that plot when you have so many ideas bouncing off, but you have to make it less than 2 pages, for instance, and condense it in a way that tells your story without it going for too long. So I remember that quote is actually really pertinent to this because in a short story, creating that plot itself and condensing it as well as in a poem and creating an ambiguity for the reader to be able to discern it in a way that is deeper than how you present it was really important, was really vital in my creation of plot and incorporating these strengths into the plot. I'm not really sure if that makes sense, but
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that
Hmm.
makes sense.
Hmm.
Um, that's a great review, and there's another one here. Her plot twists keep me on the edge of my seat. Everyone loves a great plot twist, and there's been some fantastic examples out there. How do you factor in a plot twist? Do you plan the plot twist to go in there? You obviously mentioned that you're kind of a pantster, so they just do they appear to you? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I actually wanted to go back to that too because when I'm creating a plot twist, I don't think about it. I just think about everything that I'm writing right now and I think about what I want to happen. I think about what would captivate the reader,
Mm,
especially at the end of a chapter, the end of a part, or the end of a section, and I just put that in there. So it's definitely a lot of spontaneity and last minute decisions, but so far actually plot twists have been my favorite thing to write because it's really interesting to come up with them on the spot and to not even think about them, to just have the idea for it in the moment. It's
Hmm.
actually a really fascinating thing.
Yeah, you mentioned then as well ending a chapter. Do you try to leave that, asking questions or wanting readers to continue to the next page? How do you work that in?
Yeah, actually, I sought this out as a reader myself because I know that if a
Mm,
book ends, if a chapter ends on a boring note, then I'm not going to go to the next chapter. If it ends on a note that intrigues me and I know that I just want to keep reading, then I'm definitely going to go to the next chapter. And that's how I wanted it to be with my readers because actually a lot of the feedback that I've got on my book so far is that it was kind of a one-seat or two-seat read and that people could read it very quickly because of all the plot twists and page turners, I guess. So that is really what I'm going for when I'm writing my book. And it's a bit different with sci-fi because with sci-fi, actually, this book is a lot longer since I have a lot more going on in the plot. But nevertheless, at the end of every single chapter, I try to put something that either leaves the reader closing the book to ask questions or continuing with the book to answer their questions. So that's definitely what I look for as a reader. Actually, that's a great example of the book that I'm reading right now. It's called Where the Crawdads Sing. It's a very popular book by Delia Owens. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's a very popular book. It's a murder mystery slash historical fiction. It's a very good book. And the chapters either make me want to keep going
hmm.
or make me close the book and just ponder it and think about what I just read and what questions I have, and then keep going based on those questions that I have. So that's really what I go for when writing these spontaneous plot twists.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Uh,
Mhm.
and one more review in there with questions off the back of. I've not only read it once, but I've read it 4 times. Have you seen that before?
No, actually, I've not seen that review before.
That is incredible.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, they say that I've read that 4 times already. It took me about 2 hours to read it for the first time. So as you can tell, I love it. My question off the back of that, but that is awesome. How long did it take you to write your first novel, and at kind of what age did you start writing? Obviously, you said you mentioned you released it at 11. So what age did you start writing it?
Mhm. I started writing it at when I was around 8 or 9 years old. I think around winter when I was 8, which was near when I was turning 9. So, yeah, and I've seen that review before. Is it on Amazon US or?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah, that's incredible actually.
yeah. There
So,
was a lot more to that review. That was just the top bit, and
oh
as
wow.
soon as I saw that, I said I need to show that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I did not even know that was out there.
Super
Um,
fan already.
Yeah, thank you. So, yeah, it took me several months to write it because actually
Mm,
this is a quote by Stephen Kane that you can revise your book and go back and edit as many times as you want, but to actually write it, you should take no more than 3 months. Because it doesn't matter how sloppily you write it, just write something so you have the idea so you don't lose your grip on the ideas that you have.
hmm.
Um, or the spontaneous ideas that come based on what ideas you already have. And then when it comes to editing and revising and going back and editing every single word or chapter that you find incorrect, you can take as long as you want because revisions are probably one of the most important processes to writing.
Yeah, no, I get that. That's a great line. I do the exact same thing. I smash my first draft out there, then I
Yeah,
let it sit for months and months without
yeah,
finishing off the edits.
yeah.
Yeah, so moving on to what is I guess, your sci-fi second book now.
Mhm.
Are you taking any different steps towards writing that compared to the first one?
Yes, for sure. It requires a lot more research because with
Mm,
murder mysteries, I did have to research some elements, just what do police do when there's a murder mystery case. So I wouldn't just put a bunch of incorrect information because it is fiction, but I didn't want to make it seem entirely unrealistic.
yeah.
And it was unrealistic in some aspects, given I was still young and my imagination was racing wild. But for the most part, I had to do research on just small elements like what do police do in a murder mystery case, what a certain things look like or what yeah, so for that, it was for the science fiction book, it's definitely a lot more research in terms of how robots work because
Hmm.
actually the main part of this is robots and the development of sentience and emotion in robots. So I have had to do a lot of research on that and a lot of research as well on honestly, it has required a lot of what I call literary research. I've had to read a lot more science fiction books as of right now than I have in the past because this is a bit peculiar, but developing characters in science fiction books is different from developing characters in other novels because there's definitely more character development and character relationships that go on to make most of the story plausible. For instance, if you're trying to talk about, I don't know, two characters trapped together in outer space, then there's obviously a lot more character development and a lot more that goes on between them than, for instance, in a novel, again, about I'm not sure, but in a thriller novel, for example. So writing science fiction is definitely, to me at least, harder than writing a mystery novel. But I'm
Yeah.
really enjoying the process so far. So
I feel as well with science fiction, there's a lot more people who really delve into the detail a lot more. Do you know what
yeah,
I mean? So they're a
yeah,
lot more picky with the details you use in science
that's
fiction.
yeah.
So I
hmm
do think you have to approach that with a bit more care and attention.
hmm
Yeah, what is it about the science fiction sort of genre you love as much as the mystery and horror?
hmm So actually, I watched the movie I, Robot I watched the movie for the book I wrote by Isaac Asimov a couple of years ago, and it's one of my favorite movies because it also actually discusses it in a bit of a different way, and it's more about how humans control robots as opposed to how robots control themselves. But it also talks about the development of sentience and human organic understanding in artificial intelligence.
Mm,
So I remember when I watched the movie, I was incredibly interested, and the entire night I just researched robots and new developments in them or new progressions. And I found actually a robot called Sophia the robot, which is the first robot to get a credit card, the first robot to get a citizenship, I believe. And I watched several interviews with the robot, and I remember um, her saying, it was a joke kind of, but her saying that she would overthrow humanity, and that there is no God until robots have come. So fundamentally, robots are superior to humans. And that really interested me in the sense that how superior are robots to humans? How superior can artificial intelligence be to humans when their mind actually develops this sentience or these
mm,
emotions? Which got me into thinking, how can I write a science fiction novel and how difficult will it be?
amazing.
Thank you.
Right. So what we're going to do, we're going to move on to part three, and we normally do this live. So normally the questions come in from the audience, but
Uh-huh.
as this is pre-recorded, they have sent
Mhm.
some in for us, which is a special treat.
Okay. Awesome.
So let's put on part three of the show. Before I do throw their questions in there, I do have a few myself.
Mhm.
So, um, if you could take the ending of any story and change it, whether it be a good or a bad ending, and adapt it to any way you want, what ending would you take? And it can be from a TV, film, or literature.
Mhm. I'm sorry, I just need a moment to think about this. Because there's been a lot of novels that I've read, and I'm trying to think about some more recent ones where I actually have the details in mind. Actually, I'm actually going to use Where the Crawdads Sing as a perfect example because this is a spoiler alert if you have not read the book yet. So I would recommend not listening if you have not read the book because this is a major plot twist and a major spoiler alert. But in the very end, the main character dies because she is convicted of a murder that she did not actually commit. So she is convicted of a crime and sentenced to a death penalty for something that she did not actually do.
Hmm.
And I would change this because it becomes evident who really did the crime, and they did it for a good cause to protect her because of something that was going on between them a couple of years ago. So I won't reveal too many details in case you want to read the book or have not read it yet, but I would definitely go back and change that ending because I did not feel very satisfied, actually. It was a very powerful book, but I felt it would have been more powerful had she stayed alive and
Hmm.
had the person who actually did it, who she loved, been convicted. So I would go back, and this is actually a very interesting question. I've never really contemplated that before, but I would go back and change that.
That's a great answer.
Mhm,
Okay, so if you could take a character from fiction, again, TV, film, literature,
mhm.
and put that either into one of your stories or bring them into real life and do something with them, what character would you choose?
Probably Hermione Granger to help me with studying for my biology test this coming week because there's just a lot. Actually, that's what I was doing this whole morning.
Hmm.
So as of right now, yeah, maybe tomorrow I'll have a different answer, but yeah.
Okay, great answer.
Mhm.
Okay, what is your biggest fear or phobia?
I think it's more of a metaphysical phobia than a physical one, like spiders or heights. I think mine would be probably losing touch with myself and losing touch with who I really am and witnessing myself become someone that I'm not, or witnessing someone that I love become someone that they're not.
Hmm. Good answer again. Okay, what one person would you like to go on an adventure with?
Out of
You
living
can
company.
be real or fiction.
Mhm. It's really interesting. I don't know. Actually, there's a lot of possible answers, but
I should call
again,
this
I'm trying to
section "Put You
recollect
on the
my
Spot"
novels.
section.
I'm sorry?
I said I should call this section "I put you on the spot" section.
Yeah,
Uh,
again, I'm trying to recollect some of the novels that I've read recently so I can think.
it's all right. We can come back to that. We'll move on.
Okay, thank you.
Um, so what does this is kind of more of a serious question now. When you say looking back on your career in the future, what does literary success look like for you?
Making an impact on other people's writing, because for me, for instance, every author that I consider to be successful or consider to be grandiose or appreciable in my eyes is one that has made an impact on how I develop my writing, how I develop my perspective on literature. So I would say authors like Dostoevsky, Bulgakov, Edgar Allan Poe, Stephen King, Agatha Christie, they're all literary geniuses because of how much they changed literature and writing for many authors. Mhm.
That is amazing. Okay, so let's get the questions from the community. I've asked enough now. Let's have a little look. Okay, this is from Anya Pavel. Thank you, Anya. Where do you find your inspiration to write? How do you balance your career as a novelist with other commitments?
Mhm. Thank you for your question. So I find a lot of my inspiration to write from the people around me and everything that happens in my daily life. So for instance, even if I just go for a walk outside, I'll see something, or if I go people watching, I will see something or a person or a thing or an action that inspires me. And I immediately just write that, but contort it into a different way to go with my plot and my characters and such. And it's pretty difficult to actually cram everything into one day, especially since I have school from 8 to 3, and then I have commitments like I play basketball, I play the piano, I'm on my school's debate team. So I have a lot of commitments there, but at the same time, I need to find time every single day to write, which is really important because even if you write just 100 words in one day or 50 words or one sentence, I think it's very important for a writer to write every single day so
Mhm.
they keep this kind of idea of what they're writing and the plot they're trying to develop.
Yeah. Do you have a daily word limit?
I do not actually have a word limit, nor do I have a word expectance because I used to do that and I found that it really just wasn't. Because,
Okay.
for instance, I used to have a thing where I would write 2,000 words a day, and this was during online school, so it was actually a lot easier to do things since
Mm.
online school was a lot easier to balance than in-person school, and no sports during online school during COVID, obviously. So 2,000 words is actually a pretty good amount. And I found that it didn't work for me, especially on days that I really did not have a creative flow.
Yeah.
So I would write, for instance, 1,000 words. That was all I could write. Then I just hit a block, and I would just keep forcing myself to write. And what I wrote often wasn't that good because it wasn't something that came. It was something that just was forced out of me. And same thing with putting limits. When I, for instance, wrote 2,000 words, and I thought to myself, well, I've written 2,000 words, but I have this great idea, but I can try it tomorrow since I've already
Mm.
fulfilled my limit. That really didn't work for me either because the next day either I forgot or it just wasn't as concrete as it was the day before. So yeah, I don't actually have a word count. I just write however much I'm feeling.
Someone on the show before, I can't remember who it was that said it, but they said that when they're writing, if they're in like a really good flow, that's kind of the time they'll end the session, as opposed to trying to get the creativeness out there that's not really going. Because he
Hmm.
says when you think about it all day, and the next day or in the morning when you wake up, you're thinking about the story, as opposed to thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure where this is going." And I
Yeah.
thought that was quite an interesting comment.
So actually, yeah, that's very interesting.
Mm.
Uh-huh.
Okay, thank you, Anya. A question from Chelsea. What's the last book you read? What made you want to start writing? We kind of touched on that earlier. What do you hope to accomplish with your writing?
Mhm. So the last book I read, I already talked about this, but where the crowd had seen the book before that was A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway, which was fascinating. The end was just a bit confusing, to be honest. Actually, speaking of what we were talking about, changing endings, I would definitely change that ending a little bit because it was, again, it was very powerful, but it had a lot of more potential had Hemingway put more detail into it, and because I felt that it was just rather abrupt.
Hmm.
So what made you want to start writing? I think we already talked about that. And then what do you hope to accomplish with your writing? Actually, this ties into what I said priorly, but I hope to make a difference on someone else's writing or someone else's perception of literature. Because to me, I think that's what a successful novelist does.
Definitely. Okay. Who are you inspired by in the real world? Who are your biggest cheerleaders?
Mhm. That's a great question. I think probably my biggest cheerleaders are people like Emma Watson
Hmm.
because she's a global activist. She's collaborated with many different authors, many different. She's just caused many different incentives and created many projects. She's also been in one of my favorite movies of all time, The Perks of Being a Wallflower. So, and just a lot of other different movies that I love, like even Harry Potter, for instance. And yeah, other than Emma Watson, I would say Agatha Christie because I do actually admire Agatha Christie's a lot, and she was one of the first female authors to break through in the thriller genre. Before her, I don't really know that many. Before her was mostly just, again, um, a lot of male authors. So she was amongst the first female authors to actually break through in that particular genre. And I'm trying to think who else. Because, well, people like Edgar Allan Poe, like Stephen King, who I mentioned before. Um, I can't really name many off the top of my head,
That's all right.
but
That's fantastic.
yeah,
There's plenty of people in there.
thank you.
And we got one more from Connor, and we will start to wrap the show up then. Who are your personal heroes when it comes to authors? We kind of mentioned that already,
Mhm,
and what you're hoping to do next. So we've obviously mentioned that you've got your sci-fi story, but let's look a bit further past that with that question.
mhm. So I hope to. So do I hope to do next in terms of my career as a writer, or just in
Not
general?
at all. In general, you've mentioned that you've got a very busy sort of life going on.
Mhm.
Let us know what the plan is.
Yeah. So I hope to continue being an active participant in my school's community because I think that's important. It's helped me meet so many new people this year already.
Hmm.
Um, so playing sports for my school and being on my debate team in my school. And then I've been playing piano since I was 8, so I really hope to continue that because we're currently learning a very interesting piece that's actually been one of my favorites of um, all time. Before it was just a bit too difficult for me to actually learn, but now that I've been playing for so long, we can actually start learning it. It's For Elise by Beethoven, and it's a very recognized piece. It's one of my favorites.
Wow.
And in terms of writing, I do hope to write at least 2 more books by the time I graduate high school. So my science fiction being one of them, and then another one possibly down the road. I don't really have an idea for that yet, but I think that ideas just come with time and come with
Hmm.
experience as well. So yeah.
Fantastic. Are you thinking of writing your own music as well?
I'm sorry?
Are you thinking of writing your own music as well?
Music, as in for piano?
Hmm.
I've never really thought of that, to be honest, because I've always preferred to just playing other people's music. I've never really been much of a composer. I tried to when I was a kid, but before then I didn't really know how harmony worked and how chords and different um, notes worked. So it was a bit chaotic, but I might try that again because it's actually very interesting. And I'm not sure
Yeah.
if I would ever publish any music, but if it turned out well enough, then I think so. Mhm.
Here's a question for your book. If you could take, obviously, your character Lexi,
Mhm.
and say your book was optioned and it was going to be made into a film, who would you have cast? Would you have any ideas?
So, okay, so for Lexi, I definitely know who I would cast to be. Well, this is actually if she was still a bit younger. I would definitely know who I would cast to be Sophia Persephone, who's the leader of the Black Sisterhood. I would cast Mila Kunis
Mm,
because for some reason she always just really matches the kind of vibe, the kind of character that I get from Sophia. But that would be if she was obviously still a teenager. And Lexi, I've never really thought of that because I think when writing this novel, I associated not with actresses or actors, but with people I knew from real life. So I would definitely cast people I knew from real life. But in terms of actors, I didn't haven't really ever thought of it actually.
mm. What do you feel is, when it comes to writing, is kind of the hardest part for you? And then, kind of a flip side, what is your kind of favorite part of writing?
Mhm. My favorite part of writing is, I'll just answer the first because I definitely know what it is off the bat, is creating those plot twists and incorporating that spontaneity into my novel.
Mm,
Because it just comes so randomly and it's often the best ideas that I have while writing. My least favorite part is working on arguments between characters that are generally on good terms. That's a very specific example, but it's important to incorporate into the novel because showing just a perfect relationship between friends or family is just unrealistic. So that's my least favorite part because then kind of climbing up from that and making their relationship on good terms again is often difficult. And I just don't like doing that because um, I don't like being in a fight with my friends or my family. So that's probably the most difficult part for me, actually. I know it's a very specific example,
mm.
but I actually thought of that because I'm working on that right now in my science fiction book. So yeah.
And what tip would you give an indie author that's starting out, trying to get to kind of where you are with a published novel? What one tip would you give them?
Probably my advice would be just to not look back because there's I'm not sure if you know, but there's a very famous Greek myth, and it's about how I don't remember the character's name, but it's about how his wife gets trapped in hell and he goes down to save her, and Hades allows him to bring her back up to life under one condition: he doesn't look back while he's leading her up to the real world. And I remember when I read that myth, I thought it was more of a metaphysical meaning to not look back, because if you constantly just look back and you're writing revise and revise and revise, you'll lose your ideas, which is why I think that just writing your full draft first and not stopping is a lot better than constantly going back to change and fluctuate the smallest of details.
That is a fantastic answer. Kristina, thank you so much. Before we do wrap this up and shoot off, where can people find your book, and what was the name of the website so other people can find
Mhm.
it, please?
Yeah, it's my website. You can find everything on there. It's my name, which is Kristina.co. That's it. And
Dot
that's where
.co.
you can find my all my other podcast interviews, my novel, my social medias, my writing for Thrive Global, and so on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so
Um,
much for having me. Hmm.
Not a problem at all. Really enjoyed that. And for the guys that are watching and listening now, next week I have on Belinda. Sorry, where's that gone? Belinda Kirk, she has spent over 24 years leading groups into the wilderness all over the world. These include numerous personal expeditions and youth development expeditions, biological research missions, remote filming trips for the BBC. She's released a book in August, which is called The Adventure Revolution, and it's about life change and managing anxiety, overcoming fear, finding self worth, and building interpersonal connections to be a happier, healthier, and more playful adventure revolution um, person, which is sounds absolutely incredible. So join me
Yes.
next
Mhm.
Tuesday for that, and that will be back live. In the meantime, Kristina, thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and for me, it's goodbye. Um, we'll see you soon.
Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. Bye.